fast, but hello everyone. Thank you guys all so much for being here. Welcome to our Spring 24 Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion panel discussion. The purpose of this event is to enable those inside and outside of AK Psi to join the conversation of DEI and have it be facilitated by people who really have experiences in regard to the topic of conversation. So with that said, my name is Nikki and I'm the VP of Philanthropy and Inclusion for AK Psi.
Hello, my name is Roberta Cullinan and I'm the Director of DE&I for AK Psi. We're super excited to have you all here. We'd love this to be a very engaging, open conversation. So feel free to jump in, ask questions as the panel's going on. And without further ado, we'd like to start with our panelists. Introducing yourself, please explain your role within FSB and why DE&I is important to you.
You can start off.
Good afternoon, my name is Tekeia Howard. I am the Director of Programming in the Office of Transformational and Inclusive Excellence. I've been at Miami for about 6 years. All of my work, all of my career, regardless of where I was in K-12 or in higher education, has all been around this idea of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Likely heavy on the equity and inclusion piece. And why it's important to me, I think is a part of my life. I initially went to school to be a journalist, a magazine journalist, for the sole purpose of being the voice of those folks so I didn't see in magazines, or what I may call the voiceless. As I continue my career, I've always been in education and or nonprofit. It has always been about providing access and equity for those folks who don't have access to be the best version of themselves that they want to be, right? So whether it be in K-12, ensuring that students had, all students, public school students, had an opportunity for education that I felt that I was exposed to in private entities. I also work K-12 in a private organization, whether it's that or whether it's making sure students have access to career opportunities and identifying majors, as well as my nonprofit or community organizing is about organizing, be it from voting or be it talking about the lifespan of women of color who are pregnant and those lives of the children thereafter, so babies and things like that. So DEI is important to me because it is about advancement of oneself as well as community and hopefully the nation moving forward.
All right, I think I'm next. All right, here we go. I got major squirrel energy, so if I get off topic, someone tell me, please. That's how I call my ADHD. I've got that. So my name's Ravancho. I use they, them pronouns. I'm an academic advisor here at Farmer. I've been here in this role for about 1.5 years, almost 2 years now. But my entire education experience for college has been at Miami. Did my bachelor at the regional campuses for Hamilton and Middletown. Also spent some time at VOA. So minus Luxembourg, I say I've been at every campus. So there's that. I also did my master's degree in student affairs and higher education here at Miami with concentration on the racialized trends and realities of BIPOC students. For me, DEI has been a major impact in my college experience, but also my life experience as a whole. I'm a queer Filipino individual. Growing up, I was like the only, there were other Asians, of course, but they were more East Asians. But they always hung out with the white-centric groups in my schools. So I always found myself being, I'm not white enough to be with the white kids, I'm not dark enough to be with the black kids. So I was always othered and I had that feeling in grade school and even in high school too, even though my high school was not a predominantly white institution. It was still othered during that period. And then I also grew up in a single income household. And my mom, and the only income was a teacher's salary. So like not a whole lot, right? So lost a lot of access in college because my dad got a job right before I started, and FAFSA decided to screw us over and said we made too much money, my parents did, and they were going to support me through college, so I had to work full time to be able to financially support myself and put myself through. So DEI is important because it's been my lived experiences, and there are a lot of barriers I faced that I want to tear down, remove, do whatever, blow it up, I don't know, we'll do something with it. But these barriers, they gotta go.
Thanks for sharing that, Jay. That was awesome. Hello, everybody. My name is CJ Szaz at Farmer. I'm the president of Kappa Psi Gamma Chi. In my social fraternity, I was our first DEI chair 2 semesters ago, which was a really exciting role that I had to work with. And then my interest in DEI is basically threefold. The first thing is I've had amazing just female people in my life. Watching my sisters growing up, they're my best friend. Just watching the way they interacted, equity became really important to me, because I would see certain things they were going through job opportunity-wise and realizing that they would have to change things in order to get them into a certain place to be successful. So just hearing those stories from there, I thought was massively important. Second fold is thought diversity. After working my internship last summer in consulting, it was amazing the team settings that you had diversity on. Whenever you were in a team setting and you had people from different backgrounds together, I felt like our results were far better than when we would have it with people that had similar backgrounds. People come in with the community that have different thought processes, different experiences. They can bring so much more to the table and elevate everyone there, which I think is extremely important in our culture. And then third from is from the AK Psi point of view. I think our entire goal at AK Psi is to be always improving, always trying to make sure that we can level up. I think Nikki and Britta have done an amazing job this year, or extremely grateful for all the work they've done. And I think there's obviously still a lot of room to work, and I think that's the reason that we're trying to put on things like this so that we can continue to improve and make it a better workplace and business journey for everyone involved.
Hey everybody, I'm Dr. Darryl Rice. I'm an associate professor of management here at the Farmer School of Business. I've been at Miami since 2015, so I guess I'm the old person. On the panel, what makes DEI matter to me? I teach it, I research it, I live it. It's kind of part of who I am. A lot of it is based upon lived experience, and I couple that lived experience with an evidence-based approach, because I think my background is also, I was a finance undergrad major, so I always love kind of, if I have to have a difficult conversation, I don't want you to argue with me, I want you to argue with this data. But lived experiences, just, growing up in the South as my mom, a single parent, me and my two other brothers, and you just see a lot in terms of, oh wow, life and society can be really messed up at times. But I've always had this tendency to rattle cages and speak up for those who did not have a voice. And I ended up becoming a professor who gets to teach at what I would consider one of the top universities in the country.
Hi, my name is Nazar Abbas. I'm actually not associated with FSB. I'm majoring in political science in CAS, but I was vice president of DEI for IFC, and I actually founded that position. So I wrote the amendment, got it passed, advocated for it, and I'm the first person to hold that position within the history of IFC at Miami University. I was also a founding member of my chapter's DEI committee. I'm a beta here. And then nationally, I hold a position on Beta's board of trustees for like the international organization, and I have been an advocate for DEI implementation in chapters across the nation and internationally. And then as far as like my lived experience, or why DEI matters to me, is because it's tied directly to my lived experience. I grew up in West Virginia as a Middle Eastern male, and there were multiple times throughout my life where I felt that I didn't really fit in with people in my community. And I never really want people to have to feel that way. And so that's why I'm passionate about DEI, is because I have felt that way.
Awesome, thank you guys so much for sharing that. With our second question, we just want to kind of talk a little bit about why you think DEI can benefit organizations, or how you've seen DEI be implemented into organizations. And yeah, we can just talk about that. Whoever wants to kick it off.
I think CJ's opening statement was cool in terms of his experience in regarding when you do have people with diverse perspectives. We call that this is the business case for DEI. Time and time again, one of the most consistent findings in organizational studies is when you have a diverse team who have diverse perspectives and diverse skill sets, the team tends to be more innovative, they tend to outperform. And when I'm teaching this in my class, I would like, think about, you guys are a general manager and you have to build a Super Bowl contending team. Will you pick all quarterbacks for your team? No, right? Because you're replicating your skill. There's no different perspectives. It also leads to a mismatch in terms of what we need to accomplish our goals. So I think one of the benefits that organizations consistently, that we see organizations reap when they have a diverse talent pool, a diverse work group, is it tends to increase performance, It minimizes people feeling isolated because you feel welcome. And when individuals feel welcome, they feel like they can bring almost their whole selves. It's really that someone brings their entire whole self. But you just have a higher level of engagement and commitment. And it also reduces turnover, which is a huge drag on any corporate line. So the benefits definitely outweigh the cost, because there are some costs.
Piggyback off of that, there's plenty of studies, and it shows like the difference of how one person of color, one person of a different gender, and that intersectionality of the two as well can make a huge difference on results, in terms of profitability for a company, in terms of success, the way your business interacts with clients or your clientele, as well. So I didn't realize it, but when I was a general manager for a restaurant, I had the best management team, and I proudly wear that hat, because on my management team, and I was very intentional about this, I wanted something that represented the general audience that my store served. So I had a single mother who was widowed with 3 kids. I had somebody in college besides myself. I had a black man who had gotten out of jail. That was a tough one for me to fight and be like, I need him on my management team, because there are so many policies against it. But I got him on. He was my best manager, still with the company today, so I'm very proud of that. Still calls me and tells me how things are, so I love that. And then I had a teenage mother on my team as well. And I wanted all of these different experiences. One, because I wanted a store that felt like home for the general audience that we were serving. Because we serve anywhere from people who are on food stamps to extremely affluent individuals. So I wanted a range, because I wanted my store to make it seem like this was just an extension of your living room. And that was how it felt, and everybody who came always had good experiences. Nobody ever was turned away. We did whatever we needed to do work. Surprisingly, we were the best team based on that, and I got a lot of slack for it, because there were thoughts like, oh, well, the guy who was in jail, he's gonna steal. The mothers, they're gonna steal from you, whether it's food or money, or having these people in these positions are gonna turn people away. Like, had somebody with face tattoos as my assistant manager, right? Like, that's unheard of in most cases. But we had the best numbers consistently, and I'm like, I looked at all the other management teams and white people. I say it like that because they all came from affluent places, and they all honestly felt that, excuse my language here, that their shit didn't stink. So, I fought hard against that and had some very eye-opening discussions as well, because to serve who you're working with the best, you have to have a team that looks like that.
I think,
You got it, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
I would just add that I think that diversity, equity, inclusion in organizations just completely makes sense. I mean, Dr. Rice started off with all the business case. And I can truly say in my life, every time I have an opportunity to build a team, I look for someone who's least like me, because there's already one of me, right? Back in my church, I've heard some of our elders say, both of us are the same, one of us are not necessary, right? We're not necessary, so you're expendable. And although that has been a place of excitement for me and energy for me, I do realize that to get to decisions, it may take longer. But more likely than not, the outcome has always been better. So my close relationships with my colleagues who became friends is because of we were different. When I was in the Career Center, a lot of people was like, oh, you and your colleagues get along so well. Every meeting we were gonna argue with respect, right? And with a goal of being better, but it was only good. Some of the best work that I've produced. So the best teams I've been on is because each and every one of us were different. Our foundation may have been the same, committed to DEI, right? Committed to advancement and access and equity. But I think the benefit of having DEI in an organization is you can become better. The road may look different, it may be longer, let me acknowledge that. But I truly believe having all those voices and ideas, even when folks look alike, right? My team at one point was all black women, yet all black women born in America. But guaranteed, we're the most inclusive team because we understood different perspectives, internally and externally.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. Adding on to that, I think the idea that you're also touching on is that when people can bring more of their whole selves to their working environment, they're gonna feel a lot safer. And when people feel more safe and comfortable, not only from a performance standpoint, yeah, things are gonna improve, but also too, people are gonna be able to bring their full selves and be able to connect with the people around them. From my experience this summer, I was working in a team that was really diverse. We had people that were non-American, from Asian culture, we had people that were coming from all over the world. And when people would come through and they would talk about their experiences, I think it was a lot easier for everyone to feel safe on that team and be able to collaborate, because they could talk about how they were going to certain committees and clubs and trying to figure out what is life like for them in America, and be able to have those conversations outside of work, I think only benefited the work itself. And then again, touching the idea of outside of work, if we have that safety, they're a lot more comfortable having conversations if they have questions. Because at the end of the day, there are certain difficulties that come with changing in certain environments to another, and being able to have that safety provides an open room for questions and conversations and allowing people to be on the same page. In an organization, I believe that's absolutely essential to have that level of safety. People can bring as most as they can of their full selves to that environment.
Yeah, I mean, so tying this into, sorry, my fraternity experience, coming from West Virginia and being somebody who's Middle Eastern Muslim, I never thought that like a fraternity would be a place where I could feel safe, where I could feel welcome. And diversity, equity, and inclusion kind of became my like safe place. So I devoted a lot of energy to that, hoping to like build a bridge for other people who come after me, which I have done. I was the first person on my in my fraternity to be a person or a non-white identifying individual on the exec board. And since me, there have been like 4 or 5 people to come after. And that's why diversity, equity, and inclusion matters. It's so like every voice in the room can be heard. And that ultimately improves performance like everybody else has been saying.
Great, thank you all for sharing that, that was great. Moving on to our next question, we really want to talk about how we can hold more DE&I conversations. So how can everyone be a part of the DE&I conversation?
Ask the tough questions. You know, there's plenty of policies and processes here, and not only just here at Miami, but also at large in any company you're gonna go work for, that are really gonna make you kind of say, what's going on here, and why is this in place? And you really gotta think about how to answer those questions, right? Even if you're not in that end group that's being affected by it, you can still advocate, and you can still show up as an ally in those areas of the world. A lot of my research has been focused on first-generation students of color specifically, with an underlying focus on commuter students and their lived experiences as it pertains to living on residential campuses. It's kind of hard, but from that, you know, there are ways that we can perform and show up as a true ally, and not just have that performative allyship where we have interest convergence, which is where the interest of the in group matches that of the out group, and it just makes you look better. Like, no, you don't do that. Allyship is a conscious choice, it's an intentional choice where you're stepping behind or next to the group you're trying to support and help out. And there are ways you do it, whether it's educating yourself first before you learn to ask that tough question, whether it's being the chaos creator, or just going through and really starting to start those conversations with your peers about how we can improve other processes. Like, ask those tough questions. It's not gonna, don't have to start big, even if it's something super small about getting someone's opinion on a subject matter that, you know, that person's identities grouping is not shown up in that team, asking them for their opinion on something and how it might impact them. That's always a great place to start too. It's always the small stuff that we can go after. We don't need to think about tearing the school down and finding more ways to change and make the school better.
I think a lot of the diversity conversations, the way that we benefit is just by having continuous learning, by being open to learn. And I know from a personal point of view, open to saying that what I thought previously might not have been correct. Not understanding what someone's culture or experience might have been like, and then being willing to listen and understand this is the way that their experience has actually been. Over the summer, we had a really cool experience where we had multiple from different religions on my team, and we went together and we would experience a different place of worship every Sunday. And whatever they wanted to do on that Sunday, we could go through and visit their church or their mosque and just experience what it was for them and appreciate what that experience was. And I think a lot of that was just being open to learning of what that was actually like on a day-to-day basis. Because you might think if we know what it's like, for example, like one of our teammates was working through Ramadan, we might think we might know what it's like for him. But after hearing the conversation, the difficult for him was waking up in the morning. I would thought it'd be in the middle of the day. You know, if you go that entire day without food or wine, that'd be difficult. And for him, he said the hardest part was having that in the morning and having to wake up and realize that he has a whole day in front of him of Ramadan. So just being open to learning and saying, okay, these are something that I might have thought previously logically or intuitively, and being open to being wrong and saying, no, that's actually the way it is, because learning about his experience and hearing that.
So a lot of my white friends, we've had these conversations where it's like they don't feel like diversity, equity, and inclusion is necessarily for them, and so they don't participate in the conversation because of that. Whereas we talk about DEI, but DEI is also synonymous with belonging. And if you have ever felt in a room where you don't feel like you belong, or a room where you feel like you can't speak up, then diversity, equity, and inclusion is for you, and you should be participating in conversations because of it.
We can kick it off with the next question. Yeah, so we can just talk about what you guys think inclusivity looks like on a day-to-day basis. Someone wants to start off.
I'll start since no one's on. So in terms of what inclusive looks like, typically what I think about is it has two components. First, you have to have this sense of belonging. But in addition to having this sense of belonging, you also have to be in an area or an environment where you feel your uniqueness is also valued. So, because if I belong, but my uniqueness is not valued, then you're telling me I gotta assimilate, and that is very problematic. However, if I belong and you're encouraging me to be kind of who I am, and my uniqueness is what matters to you, that is when your employees start feeling included. So it's this combination of people feeling welcome, and I have this strong sense of belonging, as well as being affirmed that their uniqueness is also important to the organization.
I also think on a daily basis, the two things that I tend to think about, the first one is how am I going to ask questions? When you're trying to figure out how you can integrate and have inclusivity, you want to be able to think, what questions can I ask to be aware of? I think there were experiences again, just over the summer, we were having a certain event. It's like, if you would ask questions, you would understand people's eating preferences and being, okay, are you a vegan, for example? Are there certain foods that we shouldn't have there so that way everyone feels inclusive? And I think the root of asking those questions allows you to form a better idea of how can we include everyone, and talking about that idea earlier from Dr. Rice of having that safety, so everyone feels like they can bring themselves and not feel uncomfortable in that setting.
I would just add, leading into feeling comfortable in that setting, I think living inclusive every day means you have to be vulnerable every day. You have to be vulnerable to recognize what advantage do I have and how can I extend it to someone else, something else, some policy else, some room else. Also saying that I have no idea, and let me go figure this out. Let me go ask a question. Let me go, read a book. Let me go. So I think inclusivity is important to know that you have to be willing to be vulnerable in things that you say and do on a daily basis.
So it's also important to recognize that we all have preconceived notions about who somebody is just by viewing them, looking at their clothes, the way they style their hair. but being inclusive on the day-to-day is recognizing that you do have those preconceived notions and stepping past them to see who something actually is. And that kind of goes along with what the other panelists were saying. It's like, if you ask the right questions, you'll find out stuff that you never thought that you would about somebody. And to get to that point, you also have to be vulnerable with that individual.
Yeah, this is a conversation, right? I want to jump over.
Yeah.
So I was started thinking, when I first started doing DEI work as a professional, because I think I do it in my personal life by way of existing, I was all about, we've tried to change hearts and minds for years. We, probably black folk, right? Black women. I'm like, I'm not doing that. I want to change some policy and some structures, some rules and some laws, right? And I'm sitting here, so I'm saying, are you laughing at me? So I'm sitting here thinking, oftentimes, so I guess I'm saying it's a two-way street, right? This part of our personal growth and development, our interpersonal is really important. And I also think this whole thing of inclusivity, but maybe even DEI broadly, also has to do with what can we change? What wall can we knock down to ensure that everyone, as they enter space with me, feels included, feels valued, right? And I would say professionally, maybe even personally, it can feel really daunting trying to do this one-on-one thing and learn and grow. But for me, at the beginning, I softened up a little bit, call it age. I was all about, okay, so that policy is not okay, it's a barrier. Let's change that right now. I won some, I lost one, but it's all good. But I want to recognize that this work, right, this personal journey as well, also requires structural change if we want to have long-lasting impact.
Great, thank you. Question?
Yeah. Hi, well, thank you I really appreciate the time you took today to talk to us. My name is Anastasia, I'm an international student second year here, and I think it's really interesting. I have a question, just for context. I also grew up in a country where I guess I was treated, I enjoyed all the privileges of a white person, sort of, and had that experience, grew up in a single income household as well. Came here, figured I'm on the spectrum, also ADHD, recently came out to my parents, almost ended up in like them disowning me completely. And so a lot of this experience is me coming out, and also I came, first was in CAS and studied political science, and the conversation there is completely different than I had in another major in pharma. And so I'm now in a team with people who are very different than me, and I really, really cherish that. And what you're saying, I hear a lot about leading with inclusion, which Inclusion Forum, sort of intentional inclusion. Last year, this was a theme on Inclusion Forum, which I thought was really interesting. And so what I've noticed is there's a difference when you are talking about leading with inclusion on an organizational level, which the policies and guidelines. And yeah, of course that's important. And then there's an individual level of a person. And I walk into class every day and I'm just okay, which identity do I choose today? What do I represent? And I walk in there, and having these conversations with people is really difficult. And yeah, might change their mind and make them uncomfortable for a second. But then it happens so many times when I would say something, and I'm the one who marginalized communities, let's go. And then there's this silence afterwards, and everybody just doesn't know what to say, and I'm just the black sheep all of a sudden. And I don't want that, and I don't want to go around and choose about for my identity day to day, because for me it's a legal status as well. It's not just one part or the other. It's not a play that you play. And so I'm wondering if you can talk about how do you balance that, because you were saying, oh, let's quantify this, fight the data, but I'm not data. I don't want you to fight me, you know what I mean? So that aspect, just talk about how do we manage that from an individual level, because I don't want you to leave this conversation and then go home and then, okay, whatever that girl said, right? So what is the balance there? Can you talk about that? How do we manage that, especially in a business setting?
Yeah, as someone who works with first year students right off the bat, because I teach Biz 106, the Success Strategies course, I specifically choose to teach that Monday mornings. I get to say when I teach it, I am so glad they give me Monday mornings without fail. But I show up and I'm sending these emails to these first year students. I got 2 over here. I'm not going to point you out, but you know who you are. I have 2 second years over here. They've seen my photo. They've seen all the things. I look like a man. You don't notice that I am genderqueer, that I'm gender nonconforming. You don't notice those things until I tell you these.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to balance that identity there, because we're more accepting now than we were 10 years ago, although that's questionable to say. in certain areas of the world about gender expression, but we're also learning more now because more people are speaking up about these things. So for me, it's a battle of to what extent do I feel vulnerable on that daily basis, right? Like, this might be my full self as a gender queer Filipino who's loud and obnoxious with the ADHD. But on the first day of class, I'm only showing this much because that's how comfortable I feel in that room at that given point in time. I start building those relationships with my students, telling them, and just being completely open and vulnerable. I'm not proud of this, but I've told students about my college experience and how I was a little wild child. We're just gonna leave it at that. We're just gonna leave it at that. But I was a wild child in my undergrad days. But I tell them about that because it's like, I might have all these different identities than you, but I'm not all that different. Like, I still have the college experience. I didn't let any of these identities define me. Did they inform my experience? Did they blur how I view these things? Sure. But it was still overall how I interacted, right? Like, Filipino. Philippines are the only Christian country in Asia because they're the only country that was colonized by Spain. So being black sheep, being disowned by your family members, that's me. That's me. My family still looks at me weird when I show up to the grill outs. It's fun though. Because my cousins, like, a different story because they didn't grow up in the islands. We all grew up here. But for me, it's what levels of vulnerability, what levels of trust, what level of just human compassion can I show these people to the point where it's like, oh, they're not this general stereotype that everybody in the media has made them out to be, right? Like, I might be Filipino with the ADHD and I do love good karaoke, but I'm not the first person to show up on that microphone. I'm not the first person to show up there. I do fully have a Filipino time thing going. So there is that, but that's just because ADHD, we're gonna go with that one today. I blame a lot of things on my ADHD, if you haven't noticed. It's fine though. But to your point still about how we show up and how do you choose which identities, you know, just be comfortable with who you are, live your authentic self. Don't try and hide something just because, right? Like, I get weird looks when I show up in my poncho sweater with a hood out here. Like, it's bat wings. I know you've seen it because I've taught in it before. Like, I get weird looks because, like, that's not something you commonly see on a male presenting individual. I still rock it though. But, like, I do those things because it's where I feel comfortable. It's where I feel the most in my own skin. And that's what I choose to live by on a daily basis, is like, what makes me feel most at home within my own skin. Because I hate to feel like an alien in my skin because I'm trying to live to the standard that someone else has set for me. All right, my soapbox is over.
And also to your point, so it's not necessarily that, you know, you are data, but it's saying that when someone has this idea that I have to manage my multiple personality, like, that is psychologically draining. Like, that, like, you are losing cognitive and emotional resources, and then that also impacts your ability to regulate. So we know when people feel the need that I have to manage how I show up, to what extent I'm comfortable. This is like what we call a conservation of resources problem. And typically, when you're always kind of not sure, you're losing your resources, and then since I no longer have these resources to engage, I'm going to withdraw. You start to kind of feel like you're being ostracized, and that can also have this negative impact on your emotional health. So yes, you're not necessarily data, but we do know, like, these are the adverse effects of what happened when people feel isolated, when you feel like you cannot exist in your own skin. This is why kind of the new kind of, I don't want to say new trend because we've been known this, but a lot of work is starting to tie like DEI to like well-being, because when we are ostracized, we feel like we've been marginalized, it can be a very traumatic experience. And if you know anything about trauma, like, that impacts you immediately, and it can also kind of have these long-term effects. And then sometimes you just shut down, then you just kind of feel like you're walking on eggshells. So it can lead to like some very kind of problematic psychological, sometimes you can't sleep at night, you feel cold. when you're in environments where you feel like you don't belong. That is why it is important, even in those situations where you do what's best for you in terms of your well-being. So you do have to, quote unquote, be open to make mistakes. I think a lot of people are just open about making a mistake, saying something wrong, inadvertently offending someone, etc. That's going to happen. Now, I think to Tekeia's point, I don't believe there's I don't think there's a valid DEI expert on the planet. We may know, okay, I know a lot about anti-Black racism in the workplace. I know the barriers that women face in the workplace. I'm aware of kind of these, there's an increase in our Asian and Asian American boys, encountering hate crimes, right? But when you're talking about DEI, that is very broad, and no one knows the right thing. That's why people are like, oh, you're a DEI expert. No, I'm not. I'm like, I know something about this, but I am not, quote unquote, a DEI expert because I can't speak to every identity. I didn't even know how important being a dad and a husband was until I became a husband and a dad. So sometimes that is my most salient identity. And then, me being Black or me being a professor or me being a male is not necessarily front of mind. It's like, all right, in this role I have to operate this way. But you do have to be willing to, like, guys, it's okay, we're gonna make mistakes. And I think a lot of times this fear of making a mistake kind of in the political environment we're in is kind of almost counterproductive to actually advancing DEI.
So I'm a little coaching for a second here. Oftentimes, new graduates, young professionals feel as if you need to bring your whole self to work. Lie. That is a myth. Do not do that.
Nope.
You get to choose who you are at work. I mean, be authentic, right? But it's a scale, right? If you're doing the same thing you do at work with your friends, it's probably an issue. 5 o'clock a.m. on Saturday or whatever the case, that's an issue. So how do you manage this in a business place is when you're at work, you need to be at work. And some of my best friends I developed as at work, right? But we behave differently at work than we did Saturday, and that's just maturity. So you get to choose how you want to engage at work. I encourage you to be authentic as you can be, right? Between 8 and 5, I'm lying 8 and 8 or 10, because that's the reality also in many workplaces now. And then you get to decide that, right? Now, even though you may not know all of my identities, I hope that I'm being authentic and consistent where you always feel as whatever I say, it may be a challenge and it may be a pull. But I must be consistent in my action and my words. So it may be silence after I say something, but that's okay, because one, I was true to myself, and what I said, I hope would move something forward. It may be one, it may grow 6 months from now. But you have to be true to yourself in a workspace, and you choose how you want to engage. Now, when I walk in the door, there's no secret. You can squint maybe. I am a Black woman. That's how I present, that's how I identify. There's no argument there. So already you've decided what I'm going to say anyway. So that's out the door. When I was a younger professional, I was at a different institution. I was presenting in front of the Board of Trustees. I walked into a beautiful room, all 30 some odd people. Let's say all 30 people were all white men in dark suits, and there was one Black woman in the corner. And so I asked her, I said, how in the world do you do that? Because I really don't like speaking in public, so I used to see stars, the whole big thing. So I said, how do you do that? And this was so powerful for me. She said, well, I don't have anything to prove. Everything I do, I get to shake the mold and break the mold, because I'm an original. And I'm like, all right, cool. You know what I mean? So again, you have to decide, and know it's maturity and growth, but you decide how you enter. You come correct, right? You know you're going to speak and mean what you say, speak your truth, and then you exit. You can't hold on to what other folk may think, or didn't do, or did do.
It's exhausting.
It's exhausting. You need to manage yourself, hold yourself accountable.
Right, thank you so much.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
before we jump into our last question, I want to open it one more time. Does anybody else have any questions that they'd like to ask? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Justin. I'm studying finance here at FSB. My question is just directed generally. At Miami University, do you think we do a good job of promoting DEI? And if not, do you think we could do better as students?
As students.
Yeah.
You go.
Nope, go ahead.
So, I was mixed. So mixed, yes and no. I think our students are more comfortable having these conversations than some of quote unquote the adults on campus. In terms of like, do I believe Miami has policies and personnel and staff committed to advancing DEI here at Miami? Absolutely. Do I think we have pulled back in terms of saying this is a core value, not necessarily outwardly, but just from what I see? I do think SB 83 has, I think there's a lot of over-interpreting of what's happening, and we're shying away in terms of how vocal, how strongly we feel about DEI. So I'd say it's mixed. I think we have people in personnel who are committed to doing this work because it is very difficult, especially being in a politicized state like Ohio. But I do think there are certain barriers now that has kind of stopped the momentum that we built. And I just think this is like the country in general. It seems like everyone was on board in 2020. You know, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, everyone's figuring out we gotta, society has to be better. But I can recall certain conversations that I was part of here in 2020. I was like, I want to see where we are in 3 to 5 years, because there's always a backlash. If you look at any major civil rights movement, social movement, dating back from the women's suffrage movement to the civil rights movement, every time there's like this societal push to move and become more inclusive, more equitable for all people, there's always like a backlash that happens 3 to 4 years, and long ago, we're in 2024, you see a lot of, hey, we don't want to necessarily call it DEI, we want to call it community engagement and belonging. And it was like, no, like the external forces should not impact what you consider your values. So here at Miami, I think the verdict is still out. I have mixed feelings in terms of how committed we truly are as an institution. I think our students are kind of pushing us to be more about that life, if you will, but I also think there are certain political forces where we have people in key positions that's shying away from what we truly want to do. That's just my answer.
From a, sorry, just
Yeah, because I want to add on. I think it's definitely mixed across students at large. There are definitely pockets in any division here, especially in Farmer, where you hear a lot of diversity and button pushing happening, and it's great. But at the same time, you have a lot of people who hurt themselves and the DEI efforts because people hate change. And when you feel threatened, which a lot of these DEI policies will do from a social capital perspective and sometimes a cultural capital, they push back, and that's where we get it. My first semester at grad school, there were like 3 marches on campus that ended up at President Crawford's house. Well, quotes around house, he doesn't actually live at Lewis Place anymore. But, I was like, I've never seen that happen before here at Miami. I thought it was great. Now, marches that end up at Crawford's Place, not as frequent. If anything, it's a silent protest outside of Armstrong that gets a lot of commotion because, Armstrong's like the heart of the campus almost. Everyone goes to Armstrong, everyone knows where it is. But to add on with more with what Darryl said, like we as staff, we as faculty, we as administrators, a lot of over-interpreting. You know, in our office, we're worried about what 83 is gonna do because a lot of our work, we're starting to push more and more towards supporting diverse students and other populations that we haven't previously been supporting because we know we need to support those students better because everyone deserves the true Miami experience, right? Everyone deserves to say that you got to live such a life in such a place. As cheesy as that quote is, and I'll talk all about that. But, you know, we do that. And like, if you want an impact of how 83 has already impacted Farmer, we had an office in here that was named Student Orgs and Student Diversity here in Farmer. That office has been renamed to Passport, Granger, and Ryan Scholars because there's a donor-funded program that supports a certain small grouping of students. That was a direct impact of what could happen with 83. So we as administrators are overreacting to possibilities that could happen. So I think you all, our students, are pushing us better as staff. We still have a long way to go. If you look at what the President's Diversity Forum, or whatever that group was called, way back in 2020 did, and set what their goals were, I think we've hit maybe 40% of it by the timeline we said we wanted to. I have no faith, considering that the one person who chaired it has now left because she got passed over for Dean of Students role here at Miami. And then I don't even know what Dr. James is doing anymore. I think he's still here, but I could be wrong. He's still here?
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, he's not leading a discussion anywhere on campus. He's in faculty role. So it's an interesting time.
Just to add on your question there, Justin, I think the first part is that Miami's getting better at creating resources, which personally I've appreciated that. And we're having more discussions about that in my time from a freshman out of being a junior. And I think one of Miami's greatest assets is our alumni. And I think we have a lot of alumni that are great places, and what we can do as students is figure out how do we connect the alumni that are in these certain places and allow them to access the students. As the D&I chair of my social fraternity, we would have a lot of conversations with people, like they'd have questions about like, how do I go to the workplace as a person with a diverse background? And I don't have that experience, like quite frankly, I haven't had that. But I do know, at least off the top of my head, 5 alumni who have. And being able to connect them with those alumni and have them answer those questions, and be able to give them those resources, they'd be able to find the answers they're looking for. I think us as students, maybe it's the responsibility of people that have those knowledge and resources, to be able to give that back, to be able to improve and get that knowledge base to be increased.
We'll just add, first, if you want to know more about the task force that was referenced, go to OTI's website. You can see the last few big task force around DEI. And you can see the numbers, the data, the measurements. But the other thing I think that the world could benefit from, and therefore a Miami student, is understand and learn how to have challenging conversations. The issue, many issues, some of the challenge that we have is simply we don't know how to speak and talk and relate to folks around difficult conversations. Some of that's to check ourselves. I don't always need to be right. Perhaps I'm a little bit wrong, which that's not me. But then lean in and to listen to other perspectives. I think it's what you can do is intentionally identify with someone who you can have a true conversation with. I had this one person at a different institution said, hey, and she was a white woman, and said, hey, I want to have this conversation with you. And I laid the ground rules. Now we can go there if you want to, but there's no turning back. So let me know if you're interested, and we can do that. And I think if you can find that person or people or group and say, hey, let's just meet and talk about this thing that's on fire on our campus. It doesn't have to be a program. You all will meet. I know some students who met every Friday in our center at that time, who used to just talk about difficult conversations. It was cross-racial, it's very diverse group of students. And that no administrators, no staff, they just said, can we use your space 4 to 5 every day or whenever they left? I don't know, because we left, to have a conversation. I think that's the best thing that students can do now is lean in and have that conversation.
Thanks so much.
Well, that's that's all the time we have for questions. If you did have a question and didn't get to ask, feel free, once the panel's over, to come up and ask our panelists. I'm sure they'd love to chat with you. Other than that, thank you so much to our panelists for being here today. I definitely learned a lot myself, and I'm really hoping this was a valuable experience for you all. If you already attended our resume and case workshop, feel free to go, but if you haven't, you can head over to FSB 20 to get that started. So thank you, everyone.